The shadow of Tolkien's genius has become a cage for far too many fantasy writers, because they feel bound to the world he created. So if you're worried your setting feels like a pale copy of Middle-earth, let me show you 7 rare mythologies and how to use them to craft mesmerizing worlds and stories. A common problem many fantasy writers face is pouring tons of energy into building massive and epic landscapes that, despite all the work, end up feeling strangely lifeless. The forests are just a collection of trees and the rivers are just moving water, like a beautifully rendered but empty video game level. For a powerful alternative, let's look at Slavic folklore. This tradition comes from the pre-Christian pagan beliefs of Eastern Europe, and it's built around a worldview that's deeply connected to the land. We're talking about the cycles of the seasons, the spirits of the natural world, and that constant, precarious balance between a small human village and the immense wilderness all around it. For centuries, these beliefs proved incredibly resilient, even blending with Christianity to create what scholars call dwaury, or double faith. What this meant in practice is that the supernatural was an immediate and pervasive force. This supernatural ecosystem saturated the entire world, extending from the wild spirits of the forest directly into daily life with guardian spirits living in the home, the bathhouse, and even the grain silo. Every part of life became a constant negotiation with those forces. Ultimately, this worldview presents a natural world that is alive, conscious, and often dangerously alien to human concerns. Let me make this concrete with one of its most famous inhabitants, the Leshy. The Leshy is the spirit and warden of the forest itself, basically the living will of the ecosystem given a physical form. His size is said to be fluid, so he can shrink down to the height of a blade of grass or grow to match the tallest tree. What's crucial here is that his morality operates on a completely different axis from our own. His entire moral code is based on the health and balance of the wild. Forget any idea of a gentle protector of lost animals. The Leshy is known to delight in misleading travelers, tangling their paths until they are hopefully lost. He's even been known to kidnap lost children, acting on impulses that are fundamentally non-human. For instance, he might protect a poacher who shows the proper respect for the woods, while at the same time tormenting a pious man who carelessly breaks a sapling. So the architectural lesson we can take from this is to imbue locations with their own spirit or warden. This approach elevates the goal from just creating a generic haunted forest to actually designing its unique consciousness. We can ask a few questions for this. For example, what are the fundamental rules of this place? What does it want from those who enter? What does it consider a transgression that deserves punishment? When we do this, the setting is immediately elevated. The character's journey is no longer a simple trek through scenery. Instead, it becomes a tense act of trespassing through another being's territory, forcing them to negotiate with a consciousness that doesn't share their values. This dynamic becomes an immediate source of grounded personal conflict, turning what was a simple journey into a high-stakes negotiation with the world itself. Okay, so we have a way to give our world a living consciousness now. Next, let's talk about architecting the forces that want to tear that world apart. And for that, we can turn to one of the most ancient and powerful blueprints for building high-stakes, unambiguous conflict. A common issue in a lot of modern fantasy is the antagonist who suffers from what I call narrative impotence. We've become so focused on creating sympathetic, morally grey villains that they often lose the sense of genuine menace. After we carefully constructed a tragic backstory and given them understandable motives, the story stakes can feel strangely deflated. Deep down, we present the villain as just a misunderstood person who needs a good therapist more than a hero's sword. While these complex antagonists definitely have their place, this trend has created a vacuum where true bone-chilling evil used to reside. For stories that require that level of threat, Zoroastrianism provides a masterclass in building cosmic dualism. This is one of the world's oldest continuously practiced religions, originating in ancient Persia over 2,000 to 3,000 years ago with the prophet Zarathustra. Its immense age and influence mean its theological concepts have echoed through history, shaping key ideas in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Familiar concepts like a single creator god, a final judgment, heaven and hell, and a powerful oppositional figure of ultimate evil can all trace some of their DNA back to this ancient faith. At its core, Zoroastrianism frames existence as a grand cosmic battleground between Asha, which means truth and order, and Druish, which means the lie and chaos. The theology itself is incredibly complex, with different interpretations on where evil comes from, But for a writer, it provides a powerful blueprint for villains whose evil is foundational and goes way beyond just being misguided. One of its most powerful narrative frameworks, especially in the ancient text called the Gathas, presents this conflict through two primordial twin spirits who make an ultimate choice. One is Spenta Mainyu, the bounteous spirit who chose Asha, which means truth, life, and creation. The other is the destructive spirit, Angra Mainyu, later known as Ahriman, who chose Drush, the lie, chaos, and non-existence. For us as writers, regardless of the specific framing, the architectural lesson is the same. Angra Mainyu's evil is foundational. His entire existence is defined by his primordial choice to embrace chaos. Angra Mainyu embodies the principle of anti-creation, a will whose sole purpose is to corrupt and ultimately annihilate everything good. So here's the lesson we can learn from this. If a story needs true evil, then that evil benefits from a defined moral ideology, even if that ideology is just pure negation. An antagonist built on this model seeks to unmake the world, because ruling it would mean it still has to exist. For them, the exercise of destructive power is the purpose. This creates a villain whose actions cannot be rationalized or sympathized away. Trying to compromise with a force like this is as futile as negotiating with a hurricane or signing a peace treaty with a plague. Such an approach restores a sense of real, terrifying stakes to the conflict, reminding us that some shadows are motivated by one simple thing: they just want to extinguish the light. So we know how to build a world with a soul and a conflict with real stakes. But a world needs more than just animated spirits and cosmic villains. A world needs to feel populated. The question then is, how do we fill that world with creatures that feel authentic to its history, instead of just being cool-looking monsters we've grabbed from a bestiary? A common mistake many aspiring writers make is treating mythical creatures like obstacles in a video game. They see a compelling piece of art, file off the serial numbers, and drop the beast into a dungeon as a boss fight. This approach feels derivative because it strips the creature of its original architectural purpose, making the world feel less like a cohesive whole and more like a random collection of parts. For a more sophisticated model, we can turn to the ancient river valleys of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization itself. The myths born here between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were shaped by a world of incredible innovation and terrifying fragility. These civilizations gave us writing, law, and cities, but they also lived under the constant threat of unpredictable floods, devastating droughts, and the whims of powerful, often indifferent gods. Their mythology reflects this reality, presenting a cosmos where humanity is a servant species, created to appease these divine forces in a constant, desperate battle to maintain order against chaos. Within this framework, supernatural beings were integral parts of the cosmic machinery. They basically had jobs. Take the Lamassu, a magnificent being with the head of a bearded man, the powerful body of a bull, and the soaring wings of an eagle. Their purpose was far greater than being a random monster for a hero to slay. Carved from stone and placed at the gates of citadels and palaces, the Lamassu were divine guardians, protective spirits whose entire function was to enforce sacred order and ward off chaos. They were like a living threshold, a fusion of intelligence, strength, and divinity that separated the ordered civilization within from the untamed world without. This is the point where we can learn that tropes are tools, not cliches. Because first we need to understand the trope's original function, and in the Lamassu's case, it was a guardian, a being whose entire purpose is to protect a place, a person, or an ideal. After understanding the purpose, in order to generate powerful conflict, we can give that function a tragic subversion. Imagine a Lamassu still faithfully guarding the gates of a palace complex that fell into ruin 2,000 years ago. Millennia later, a new civilization of desperate refugees starts building a settlement among the ancient stones, seeking shelter and a chance to survive. This ancient sentinel, bound by its sacred duty, perceives these people through a completely different lens. Its tragically outdated programming registers them only as defilers, chaotic intruders trespassing upon a holy site that no longer exists. Suddenly, our antagonist isn't evil, but we also haven't created a therapy villain either. Our antagonist is a loyal protector whose definition of order has become a terrifying threat to progress and survival. The conflict transforms from a simple good versus evil battle into a much more poignant struggle between the past and the future, between sacred duty and human need. This method allows us to build antagonists who are both captivating and deeply sympathetic, turning a simple monster fight into a powerful question about what we owe to a history that no longer serves us. Alright, we learned how to give our creatures a deep architectural purpose rooted in the history of the world. Now let's explore how to make the entire fabric of the world feel alive with the same sense of layered history and intention. You see, in many fantasy stories, the supernatural and the mundane feel like they live in different zip codes. There's a normal, predictable village, and then there's a magical, dangerous forest. And the only thing connecting them is the plot that forces the hero to cross the border. This creates a world that feels like a normal place with a few magical locations bolted on for the sake of adventure. The result is a sense of dissonance, where magic feels like an overlay on reality instead of an integral part of its DNA. Japanese mythology provides a brilliant framework for a world where the supernatural is an inherent property of existence itself. This intricate spiritual ecosystem is a result of centuries of cultural fusion, where the native animistic beliefs of Shintoism blended with the cosmology of Buddhism and the folklore from China. The result is a worldview where the line between the physical and the spiritual is incredibly thin and often non-existent. This tradition is built on principles of balance, purity, and respect. Every element of the natural world, from a mountain to a stream, is potentially alive and aware, demanding proper observance. An unseen world of spirits and strange creatures exists in parallel to our own, interacting with humanity according to a set of ancient unspoken rules. Violating those rules through disrespect or negligence can have immediate and dangerous consequences. This worldview is beautifully expressed through the dual concepts of kami and yokai. The idea of kami expands far beyond the Western concept of distant gods. The term refers to spirits or essences that inhabit everything from a majestic mountain or a sacred waterfall to an ancient gnarled tree. This belief system, central to the Shinto faith, means the entire world is suffused with the potential for consciousness and sacred power. Alongside the kami exists the vast spectrum of beings known as yokai. These are the supernatural creatures, the ghosts and shapeshifters of Japanese folklore that can arise from powerful emotions, strange phenomena, or places with a deep history. And here's the part that's pure gold for us as writers. It's a specific class of yokai known as tsukumogami. These are everyday household items that, after surviving for 100 years, acquire a soul and come to life. A forgotten umbrella after a century of neglect can awaken as a mischievous one-legged creature known as kasaobake. A worn-out sandal can become the bakizori, a spirit that runs through the house at night causing trouble. This is a masterclass in making the supernatural feel deeply integrated into the world. So the lesson for us is to use this principle to give every location a specific history that generates its own unique form of conflict. A bridge in your world could become something more than just a structure for crossing a river. Perhaps it's inhabited by a spirit born from a vow of love that was broken there centuries ago. A spirit that now jealously tests the commitment of every couple who tries to cross. Applying this way of thinking means every single part of your world can have a story. More importantly, that story has countless opportunities to create a tangible problem for your characters, transforming even the most mundane objects and locations into sources of wonder and unexpected conflict. Okay, by now we've made our world feel alive, layered with both animated spirits and creatures burdened by history. But what about the fundamental rules that govern that world? Let's talk about how to architect a magic system that feels like a core part of the culture instead of a separate set of tools the characters just happen to use. Often we see systems that function like a separate branch of science or a new programming language. A character learns the rules, manages their resources, and produces predictable effects. The magic remains a tool external to the character, rarely challenging or defining their core identity. For a powerful model of magic that is deeply woven into personality and faith, we can look to the Yoruba tradition. This is a vibrant spiritual system with roots in West Africa, in what is now Nigeria, which has since spread across the world and shaped traditions like Santeria in Cuba and Candomblé in Brazil. This worldview presents magic as a constant negotiation with powerful sentient forces, rather than a sterile science of inputs and outputs. At the heart of the tradition are the orishas, who are dynamic spirits governing different aspects of life and nature. There's Shango, the formidable orisha of thunder and justice, and there's Oshun, the orisha of rivers, love, and fertility. These are not distant abstract gods. They are patrons with distinct personalities, preferences, and moral codes. The magic itself is the act of directing Ashe, the spiritual life force that animates the universe, by appealing to the specific orisha whose domain you wish to influence. To gain favor with Oshun for a matter of the heart, a person would approach her domain, the river, and offer things she loves, like honey or brass, while acting in accordance with her principles of generosity and love. The way I like to think about this architecturally is to break it down into three parts: a source, a cause, and a consequence. In a system inspired by the Yoruba tradition, the source of power is Ashe, but access to it is gated through a personal relationship with the Orishas. The cost then in this model moves beyond a simple depleting energy bar to become an act of faith, involving personal sacrifice, ongoing devotion, and strict adherence to the taboos of a patron Orisha. A warrior who follows the path of Shango might be forbidden from acting with cowardice or deceit, for example. And the consequence of violating that relationship is direct and deeply personal, far more terrifying than just having a spell fizzle. Angering a spirit of justice, for example, might result in your own lies being exposed at the worst possible moment. This approach weaves the magic system into the very fabric of the world's culture. Magic becomes an expression of character, forcing your hero to make choices that reveal who they are and what they truly value. So, we found a way to build a magic system with deep cultural roots. But what about the history of the world itself? Let's zoom out from the personal level of magic and look at how we can handle the cosmic scale of our world's history without it feeling like a boring encyclopedia entry. You see, many fantasy epics suffer from a problem we could call historical bloat. The writer constructs thousands of years of kings and wars, pouring immense effort into a deep history that ultimately feels inert. This meticulously crafted lore sits in the background like a Wikipedia entry, failing to impact the characters or the plot in a tangible way. For a powerful solution to this particular problem, we can turn to Finland's national epic, the Kalevala. While the text itself is a masterful 19th century compilation of much older oral traditions by Elias Lönnrot, the world it presents is profoundly malleable. This worldview is deeply animistic, saturated with the belief that everything in existence, from rocks and trees to iron and fire, possesses an inherent spirit or power called Veki. This power is a tangible force that can be controlled. The source of that control is knowledge, specifically knowledge of a thing's true origin, or Sinti. Within this worldview, fundamental history is a source of active present-day power. The world was born from the eggs of a divine waterfowl that were laid upon the knee of the sea goddess Ilmatar. The great heroes of the story, like the steadfast shaman Väinämöinen, are masters of this ancient knowledge. They are Tietäjät, or knowers, whose immense power comes from the ability to remember and recite the source poems of the world. They can literally sing things into existence by knowing their true origins. To conjure a boat, Väinämöinen moves beyond simple spellcasting. He sings the story of the first boat, recalling the very essence of its creation. To heal a wound made by an iron blade, he must know the source poem of iron itself, how it was first forged from the milk of celestial mothers. In this mythology, knowledge of the past transcends academic theory. It becomes a form of direct creative power over the present. This is exactly how we can make the cosmic scale feel personal and immediate. And for that, we can use a framework I call law and loophole. The framework begins by establishing a fundamental law of reality in the world. This law might be something like, the world is fixed and solid and its forms cannot be changed. But then we introduce an ancient forgotten loophole. And this loophole could be that these forms cannot be changed unless you know a fragment of the Song of Creation, which can temporarily unmake reality and reshape it. Imagine a protagonist discovering the specific verse that describes how the gods folded the land to create a mountain range. They might realize with horror that singing this verse in reverse could unfold the mountains, burying the kingdom at their feet under 1,000 tons of rock. Suddenly, a dusty scroll becomes more dangerous than any dragon, raising the stakes immediately. Okay, so far we found ways to give our world a soul, design a conflict with real stakes, and build magic systems that are deeply woven into the culture. This means we've built up the what of the world. Now, for the final piece of the architectural puzzle, we need to look at the where. So let me show you how we can architect the physical space of our world to maximize drama, mystery, and a constant sense of wonder. When we design a fantasy world, our first instinct is often to draw a map. We create continents, kingdoms, and clear borders, placing the magical locations in specific contained zones. The result is often a world where the supernatural feels neatly quarantined. For a masterclass in weaving the magical and the mundane into a single shimmering tapestry, we can turn to Irish mythology. The ancient stories of Ireland present a world saturated with the supernatural. These tales describe an otherworld, sometimes called Tirnanach, that exists as a parallel reality bleeding directly into our own. This is the home of the Tuatha De Danann, powerful beings who retreated into the hollow hills and became the Esit, or the people of the mountains. Their realm coexists with the mortal world, separated by a veil that is dangerously thin and permeable. The boundaries between these realities are fluid, defined by place and time. Someone could enter the other world by descending into an ancient burial mound, crossing a particular stream at dawn, or simply by being enveloped in a strange mist while walking the moors. These thresholds are not always visible or predictable. The veil is known to be thinnest during liminal times, like the festival of Samhain, when the barrier between worlds all but disappears, allowing spirits and Sith to walk freely among mortals. Anyone who stumbles into this realm discovers that time flows differently there. The famous story of Oisin, a mortal hero who fell in love with a woman of the Cid, illustrates this perfectly. After spending what felt like only a few years in Tir na nog, he returned to Ireland only to find 300 years had passed and everyone he had ever known was long dead. This concept of permeable, unpredictable boundary creates a profound sense of ancient magic and danger. Any old hill could be a Cid mound. Any strange patch of fog could be a doorway to a place from which you might never return, or return to a world that has forgotten you. This is the key to escaping what I call the world builder's trap, that endless cycle of creating detailed maps and histories before the story has even begun. Instead of building an encyclopedia, this model encourages us to build a minimum viable world designed for drama. The lesson here is to stop thinking about cartography and start thinking about permeability. A powerful tool for this is what I call a bubble diagram. Forget drawing a continent with precise coastlines and mountain ranges. Instead, draw a simple bubble on a page and label it Mortal Village. Somewhere else, draw another bubble and label it the Sunken Barrow. Now, draw a line connecting them. That line represents the journey, but we define it by its dramatic cost, not by miles. The label on that line might read, a day's journey, but the path vanishes after sunset, and travelers report hearing voices that whisper their deepest regrets. Suddenly the journey itself is a source of psychological conflict. Another line from the Mortal Village then might lead to a bubble labeled the Fey Crossroads, with its cost being 1 hour's walk, but any promise made there is magically binding, and the local spirit demands a toll of a happy memory. This approach forces you to design what I call functional locations. A location's primary purpose becomes the conflict it generates, social, physical, or magical. If you approach locations this way, a river might transform from a blue line on a map into a physical obstacle that a vengeful water spirit protects. And a city's law might become a social barrier that forbids the protagonist from carrying the one weapon they need to survive. By using a bubble diagram, we stop being geographers and start being narrative architects. We design the space of the world based on the story's needs, creating a landscape where every journey is fraught with meaning and the border between the safe and the supernatural is never more than a few steps away. But now that we have a powerful set of architectural blueprints for building worlds with genuine soul and purpose, this is precisely when even greater, more subtle danger emerges for us as writers. The very passion we have for creating these deep, resonant worlds can paradoxically become the blueprint for a prison from which your story may never escape. The question shifts from how do we build a world to the far more critical question, how do we build just enough world for the story to thrive? This is the core principle behind what I call the minimum viable world. Learning it is the only defense against the single greatest threat to finishing your novel. So if you're ready to build a world that serves your story instead of suffocating it, watch this video here next.